I never expected that night to change everything. It was late, and the city streets were quieter than usual. The cold wind bit through my coat as I hurried down the sidewalk, my heels clicking against the pavement. I had just finished a long meeting at work, my head still spinning with numbers and contracts, but my heart was somewhere else. I wasn't just any businesswoman, I was her, Emily Carter, the CEO of one of the largest real estate firms in the country. A billionaire, they called me, but money never really meant much when you had no one to share it with. I sighed, rubbing my hands together for warmth as I passed the same street corner I always did. That's when I saw him. A man sat on the ground, wrapped in a thin, tattered blanket. His clothes were worn out, his hair messy, and his face covered in a rough beard. He looked exhausted, shivering against the night air. A small cardboard sign lay beside him, the words barely readable under the dim streetlights. Just trying to survive. Anything helps. I don't know why, but something about him pulled at my heart. Maybe it was the way his shoulders sagged, or the distant sadness in his eyes. I had seen many homeless people before, but this was different. I stopped. "Hey," I said gently, "do you need some food?" He looked up at me, startled. His eyes, deep brown, warm but weary, held something familiar. I felt my breath catch for a second, but I pushed the thought away. The man hesitated before nodding. That would be really nice, thank you." His voice was rough, like he hadn't spoken much in a long time. I smiled and gestured for him to follow me. "Come on, let's get you something warm." As we walked toward a nearby diner, I couldn't shake the strange feeling inside me. There was something about this man, something I couldn't quite place. And soon, I would find out exactly why. The little diner on the corner was nearly empty when we walked in. The smell of fresh coffee and warm bread filled the air, and I watched as the man beside me exhaled, almost as if the warmth inside the restaurant melted something inside him. I led him to a booth, and he hesitated before sitting down. His fingers trembled slightly as he reached for the menu, though he barely glanced at it. "Order whatever you want," I said, offering a reassuring smile. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. Gratitude? Embarrassment? A mix of both? "Just coffee," he murmured, "and maybe a sandwich?" I frowned. "You sure? You look like you haven't had a full meal in a long time." His lips pressed together, but after a moment, he nodded. "Okay, maybe some soup too." I waved the waitress over and ordered for both of us. As we waited, I studied him carefully. There was something in the way he moved, the way he carried himself. He wasn't like most of the homeless people I'd encountered before. I leaned forward slightly. "What's your name?" He hesitated. "Michael." Michael. The name hit me like a quiet echo from the past. I didn't react, but my heart beat a little faster. "Michael," I repeated softly. "Where are you from?" He looked down at his hands. "A place far from here," he said vaguely. "Used to have a good life, but things changed." I swallowed. There was something in his voice, pain, regret, maybe even shame. And yet, the more I looked at him, the more a strange sense of familiarity nagged at me. The food arrived, and he ate slowly, as if he wasn't used to having warm meals anymore. I let him eat in peace, but my mind raced. I had met thousands of people in my life. I had closed million-dollar deals, shaken hands with the most powerful men and women in the country. But this man, something about him felt personal. And then, as he wiped his mouth and lifted his eyes to meet mine, it hit me. Like a sudden wave crashing over me, memories came rushing back. His voice, his face, those same deep brown eyes. I gasped, because I knew exactly who he was. And he had no idea who I was. I couldn't breathe. Michael. It couldn't be. I stared at him, my hands gripping the edge of the table, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear the soft hum of the diner around us. He didn't notice my reaction. He was focused on his soup, his hands still unsteady as he lifted the spoon to his lips. But I couldn't take my eyes off him. I knew this man. I had loved this man once. "Michael," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He looked up, his brow furrowing slightly. "Yeah?" I hesitated, unsure of what to say. How could I just blurt it out? "Hey, remember me? The woman you left behind years ago?" "No. That would be cruel. He didn't even recognize me." "Nothing," I said quickly, forcing a smile. You remind me of someone I used to know." He let out a soft chuckle, but there was no real joy in it. "I used to be someone worth remembering," he muttered. His words stung in a way he couldn't have known. I felt a lump rise in my throat. The last time I had seen Michael, we had been young, full of dreams. He was the man I had once planned my future with, the man who had promised we'd build a life together. Then one day, he disappeared. No goodbye, no explanation. Just gone. I had spent years wondering what happened to him. Had he left because he didn't love me anymore? Had something terrible happened? Eventually, I forced myself to move on. I built my career, hardened my heart, and buried that part of my past. And now, here he was, sitting across from me, homeless, broken, and completely unaware that I was the woman he had once loved. "Michael," I said carefully, trying to steady my voice, "you said you used to have a good life. What happened?" He exhaled, rubbing his face. "Bad decisions," he admitted. "Thought I could take shortcuts, trusted the wrong people, lost everything." He gave a sad smile. "One day I was on top of the world, the next, well, here I am." Pain tightened in my chest. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake him and ask why he had left, why he had disappeared from my life. But looking at him now, so fragile, so tired, I couldn't. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out my wallet. "Let me help you." His eyes darkened. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity," I said softly. "It's kindness, and we all need that sometimes." He hesitated. Then, after a long pause, he nodded. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let him disappear again. Michael stared at the bills I placed on the table, his hands clenched into fists, his jaw tightening. "I can't take this," he murmured. "Why not?" I asked gently. His eyes flickered with something raw, pride, shame, maybe both. "Because I don't deserve it," he said. "I made mistakes. I lost everything on my own. No one owes me anything." I leaned forward, my voice soft but firm. "You didn't answer my question. Why not?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. His fingers twitched, like he wanted to reach for the money but couldn't bring himself to. I could see it now. This wasn't just about money. It was about dignity. About a man who had once stood tall but had fallen so far that he no longer believed he was worthy of help. So instead of pushing, I pulled back. "All right," I said, sliding the money closer to my side of the table. "Then let me help in another way." His gaze lifted to mine, wary. "What do you mean?" I took a breath. "Come work for me." His eyes widened. "What? You need a fresh start, right?" I said. "I own a real estate firm. We always need people. I can get you a job, nothing fancy, just something stable, a paycheck, a chance to get back on your feet." Michael shook his head instantly. "I can't." "Why not?" I interrupted. He looked down, his shoulders slumping. "Because I don't even know who I am anymore. I don't know if I can be that guy again." My heart ached. He had no idea how much I knew him, who he had been, who he still was beneath the pain and regret. I reached across the table, hesitating for just a second before resting my hand on his. He flinched, but didn't pull away. "You don't have to be who you were," I said softly. "You just have to take the first step." For the first time that night, his eyes filled with something other than sadness. Hope. Fear. A silent plea for someone to believe in him. Finally, after what felt like forever, he nodded. "Okay," he whispered. "I'll try." I smiled, my heart swelling with emotions I couldn't even name. Michael had no idea who I was to him, but soon he would, and this time I wasn't letting him go. The next morning, I sent a car to pick Michael up from the shelter where he had been staying. I had arranged everything: clean clothes, a temporary place for him to stay, and a job in one of my company's smaller offices. Nothing overwhelming, just a chance for him to rebuild. But as I sat in my office, waiting for him to arrive, my nerves twisted inside me. Would he remember me? Would he be angry that I didn't say anything last night? I shook the thoughts away when my assistant knocked on the door. "Miss Carter, the new hire is here." I took a deep breath. "Send him in." Michael walked in, looking different. He wore a simple button-up shirt and slacks, his hair trimmed, his beard neater, but it was his eyes that caught me off guard, less guarded than before, but still carrying the weight of his past. "Hey," I said, standing up. He gave me a small smile. "Hey." I motioned for him to sit. "How was the first day?" "Good," he said. "Strange, but good. It's been a long time since I felt like I belonged somewhere." Something in my chest tightened. "You do belong," I said softly. He looked down, rubbing his hands together. "Emily?" He hesitated before looking up at me. I just wanted to say thank you. I don't know why you're helping me, but I won't waste this chance." I swallowed hard. This was it. Michael, I said carefully, my pulse quickening. There's something I need to tell you. His brows furrowed slightly, but he nodded. Okay. I took a deep breath. You don't remember me, do you? Confusion flickered in his eyes. What do you mean? I held his gaze, my voice barely above a whisper. It's me, Michael. Emily, you're Emily. His entire body went still. His eyes widened, shock washing over his face. No, he breathed, shaking his head as if he couldn't believe it. That's not possible. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I smiled gently. It's me, and I never stopped wondering what happened to you. His lips parted, but no words came out. He looked at me like he was seeing a ghost. Then, without warning, his face crumpled and he buried his head in his hands. Emily? His voice broke. Oh God, I'm so sorry. Michael's shoulders shook as he covered his face, his breath uneven. I had never seen him like this, so raw, so vulnerable. I reached out but hesitated. Would he even want my comfort after all these years? Michael, I said softly, talk to me. He lifted his head slowly, his eyes red, filled with regret. I can't believe it's you, he whispered. After all this time. I forced a small smile. It's me. He let out a shaky breath. You must hate me. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I don't hate you, Michael, but I do need to know, why did you leave? His jaw tightened and he looked away. Because I was a coward, he admitted. Because I thought I was protecting you. I frowned. Protecting me? From what? He exhaled, rubbing his hands over his face. Back then, I got caught up in something bad. I wanted success so badly that I trusted the wrong people, made deals I shouldn't have. When things started falling apart, I owed money to the kind of people who don't forgive debts. I knew if I stayed, they'd come after me. And after you. I froze. You left? To keep me safe? He nodded, shame clear in his eyes. I thought I was doing the right thing. I told myself it was better if you hated me than if something happened to you. He let out a bitter laugh. But in the end, I lost everything anyway, and I lost you. I stared at him, my emotions in a whirlwind. For years, I had believed he simply didn't love me enough to stay, that he had chosen to leave me behind. But now I saw the truth. He had left out of fear, not because he stopped loving me. Tears pricked my eyes, and I whispered, "Why didn't you come back?" His face twisted with regret. I wanted to, so many times. But by the time I thought it was safe, I was nothing, Emily. I had nothing to offer you. And then, I saw you on TV one day. You were this powerful, successful woman. You had built a whole life without me, and I thought... He swallowed hard. I thought you were better off without me. A tear slipped down my cheek. Michael, you were never nothing to me. His lips parted, his breath hitching as he stared at me. For the first time in years, we weren't two strangers sitting across from each other. We were us again, and after all this time, I realized something. I wasn't ready to let go. Not now. Not ever. Michael looked at me like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. His hands clenched into fists on his lap, his breathing unsteady. I thought you moved on, he murmured. I wiped away a tear. I tried. His eyes searched mine, filled with guilt and longing. I never stopped thinking about you, Emily, he admitted. Even when I was at my worst, you were the only good thing I ever had, and I threw it away. I shook my head. No, Michael, you were trying to protect me, but you never had to do it alone. His face twisted with emotion. I don't deserve this. I don't deserve you. I reached across the desk, taking his hand in mine. He flinched at first, as if afraid I would take it back, but I didn't. I held on. You don't get to decide that, I said gently. I do. He exhaled sharply, his fingers tightening around mine like he was afraid to let go. I want to fix this, he whispered. I don't know how, but I want to try. I gave him a soft smile. Then try. Start fresh, not just with your life, but with us. His eyes widened. Us? I nodded. If you want it. Silence hung between us. Then, slowly, hope flickered across his face, like a man who had been drowning for years and was finally coming up for air. I want it, he said. God, I want it more than anything. I squeezed his hand. Then we take it one step at a time. A tear slipped down his cheek, but this time it wasn't from pain, it was from something else. Hope. For the first time in years, Michael had something to hold on to. And so did I. The days that followed were filled with quiet changes, small but meaningful. Michael started coming to work every day, slowly rebuilding his confidence. I watched as he settled into a routine, as he learned to carry himself with purpose again. At first he hesitated around me. unsure of where we stood. But I made sure he knew I was here. I wasn't going anywhere. One evening after work, we walked to a small cafe down the street. It reminded me of the old diners we used to visit when we were younger, when we had nothing but dreams and each other. Michael stirred his coffee, a thoughtful expression on his face. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I never left? I met his gaze. Every day. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. Do you regret it? Us, I mean? I reached for his hand across the table, lacing my fingers with his. Never. His breath hitched. Even after everything? I smiled softly. Even after everything. Michael exhaled, squeezing my hand. I don't know what I did to deserve this second chance, but I swear I won't waste it. I believed him, because this wasn't about the past anymore. It was about the future. About rebuilding what was lost. Together. Thank you for watching. Life has a way of bringing people back together when they least expect it. This story is a reminder that second chances do exist, and sometimes the past isn't as lost as we think. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and comment your thoughts below. I'd love to hear what you think. Would you give someone from your past a second chance? And if you enjoy emotional, powerful stories like this, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notifications so you never miss a new story. Lastly, share this with your friends and family, because sometimes a simple story can change someone's perspective. See you in the next one.